Hello and welcome to the forum. I'm John Mattis. We can't start a program this week without acknowledging that it's been a very bad week for our country and for our people. But I do have the perfect guest tonight to discuss underlying solutions for South Africa. Dr. Rob Davies, former Minister of Trade and Industry, held that job for 10 years. He's written a new memoir, which I think is an important one and really worth reading. It's called Towards a New Deal, Political Economy for the Times of My Life. Rob, welcome.
Thank you very much, John.
And congratulations on the book. I think it's a really important read.
Well, thank you for that.
We're going to come to some of the politics of where we are now and what you experienced, but I want to start by going back to 1994 and to understand how the ANC government got onto the path it did, because you, unlike many people in government and many politicians, you are a real expert on how you grow economies and create jobs. People say there was some sort of backroom deal between Mandela and the capitalists, but you describe it in a way that I found much more plausible. You called it an aggressive move by the World Bank and others to go on an opinion-forming exercise to influence ANC leaders to feel there was no choice.
Yeah. Well, I think that the transition in South Africa happened at a very significant moment in world history. And we need to understand that. We need to understand the dimensions of that, because otherwise I think we will think that things were just our own choices without understanding the full context. And in the end of the day, I tried to describe this. I think there were two very, very important developments that happened. I mean, the one was the end of the Cold War and the collapse of the Soviet Union, which gave rise to a huge amount of triumphalism about there being the end of history, as Francis Fukuyama called it. There was only one game in town, and that was neoliberalism. This was associated with the other important trend in the world economy, and this was the thing called globalization, or what its later critics and analysts have been calling hyperglobalization. And this was a process driven by the rise of transnational capital. It was also linked to financialization, where financial sectors grew, but not only grew, but also expanded their role, started trading in derivative products, moved away from the traditional role that banking had performed of providing services to productive capital, to actually becoming a huge repository of a lot of speculative activity. All of this was facilitated by the so-called third industrial revolution, which was the rise of personal computing and the development of the internet and things like that, which led to coordination of enterprises and the emergence of global value chains. Now,
can I just interrupt you there, because I just want to underline for people who wouldn't necessarily know this, that the role of banks under financialization, this move that you described, it wasn't productive for the real economy. It didn't. Normally, banks, in the old sense, provide funding for businesses to grow, but this activity did not necessarily lead to growth and jobs.
Yeah, I think on the, it's only very partially reflected in the fact that in South Africa, the financial services had contributed in 1994 about 6% of the GDP of the country, and by 2009 this was over 20%. It's only very partially reflected in that. So I think there was a big transfer of value and also of surplus value, to use that term, to the financial sector. And that at the time when I came into office and we started industrial policy, we did an analysis in the department which showed that, in fact, credit was not extended on any scale to any productive activity. It was the smallest and diminishing part of the total package of financial products. And what we had more was consumer-based credit that was then divided up into securities. And there was a lot of transfer of this and a lot of investment-related sort of activity that was going on. A lot of it with very complex financial instruments, derivatives, and all of that kind of stuff. And this at the end of the day, that gave rise to a huge bubble that burst in 2008 and caused a great
Right.
financial crisis. But I wanted to say that the system was coming into force, and with it, an ideology.
Right.
The United Nations Development Programme said that globalization was both a series of objective changes, but it was also a narrative or a story that went along with it. And that prescription was that we should all be following economic policies in which budget numbers counted above everything else. No matter what the underlying issues in the productive economy were, or the state of your people, you had to ensure that inflation was coming down into single digits and going down, that your budget was moving towards balance, there was this thing called new public management, which I don't just use that term in the book, but it is actually describing it, where the state moves from being a provider of services to becoming a procurer of services from private sector, where privatization is part of the agenda, and where also you deregulate many of the activities that go on in the economy. Now, how do you get a country like South Africa, ruled by a government that was drawn from the oppressed people of the country, how do you get it to conform to this? This was, I think, the challenge. And I think that
Right.
as part of it, I say in the years before, when I came back to South Africa in 1990, in the latter part of 1990, but from that time onwards, and possibly even before, there was a huge amount of opinion forming that was going on. Many of the most significant figures in the idea of what was called the Washington Consensus, which was the description that neoliberals gave for their own doctrine, including the originator of the term, all of them came to South Africa at some stage or other, participated in one or other conference, to my knowledge, and were trying to influence us. This was the issue of the time. Whatever problem we had in the economy or in the social or political economy, it was inversely related to the level of the budget deficit, and the solution, therefore, was to cut the budget deficit. So there was a lot of opinion forming, but that itself wasn't enough. And I argue that what really started to happen was you had the big business in the form then of the South African Foundation, which was an organization originally to fight sanctions, but now has turned into something else. It developed its own macroeconomic policy, which was based very much on these lines. It was rejected, interestingly enough, by the ANC leadership, but there was huge pressure on the government to conform to this. We already had some sensitivity in the form of accepting that in the government of national unity, that the first finance minister must be the nominee of the National Party and the previous finance minister. And then when he left, that a non-party person should come in the form of Chris Liebenberg. And it was only like 2 years down the line that someone from the ANC came in the form of Trevor Manuel. So I think that all of that was showed the sensitivity. And then my argument is that GEAR was essentially an attempt to produce a version of this, a homegrown, if you like, version of it.
Rob, can I interrupt you there, just so people understand? I mean, the doctrine that you're describing was free trade, austerity, small government. The government must solve things; they must free up the market. But as you know, there's a common view that this was some secret deal that someone like Mandela did in some back room with business people. My understanding is you're saying that's not the right way to look at it. It was more a case of opinion forming, World Bank and other international figures putting so much pressure on the ANC leadership, who after all were not experienced economists, and to say to them, there is no other way to go. You have to, you can't survive if you do it any other way.
Yeah, I think it's much more that. I mean, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I don't believe that secret deals were hatched. Although I do notice, and I think it is quite important that Mandela was this larger than life personality that the whole world loved and wanted to be with. Everyone wanted to, and one engagement that went sour on him was when he spoke in Davos at the World Economic Forum. before he was president, and he indicated that the Freedom Charter would be the basis of the economic policies of including the transfer of monopoly industries to the ownership of the people as a whole, and that went sour on him. And I think that was a sign at the time. So there was this huge pressure, I think, that was being put in different ways and different forms. And some individuals started to believe it. And I mean, some people were taken to even to training and such like, and came back and they were believers in this. But I think in the end of the day, well, we basically, in my estimation, the issue that was probably the strongest was that when we ended the financial rand system and we allowed the currency to float, we had a number of devaluation episodes. And I remember at the time I was on the finance committee, and there was a huge amount of fear. It's almost like, when we look back now, it sounds ridiculous. But that the 5 rand to the dollar mark was seen as a huge sign that we were, if we ended up in that space, that the rand was devalued to that extent, this was going to be an enormous shock, a sign of lack of confidence and all of that. And we had to avoid that at all costs. And
Rob, I'm afraid we must take a break, but we'll be right back. And we're back talking to Dr. Rob Davies about his new book, Towards a New Deal, A Political Economy of the Times of My Life. As most people will know, Rob was for 10 years the Minister of Trade and Industries. Rob, I'm sorry I interrupted you, but there was a quote I found in your book which I really liked. And it came from getting all this advice and comparing it to, because I've done it, I don't know if you've read any of my books, but I did similar research and came to similar conclusions. But foreigners keep telling us what to do, but they don't, to grow our economy. But they didn't do that themselves. Other countries grew their economies in their early years, not through free trade, but through managed control by governments. And so you quote the Americans when they were growing their economy in the 19th century, and Britain was telling them to have free trade and little government interference. The Americans came to the conclusion that they must do as the English do, not as they say. And the same thing really applies to us. Everybody gave us that advice, but actually that's not how things work for them, and it's not how things will work for us if we really want growth.
Yeah. So the German economist Friedrich List, and this was the title also of a book by Ha-Joon Chang, talked about kicking away the ladder.
Yes.
That you deny others access to the policy tools you yourself deployed as you industrialized. And I think one of the effects of this was that we deindustrialized. We prematurely deindustrialized. We adopted the mantra. Many of the businesses were small, probably uncompetitive, certainly behind high tariff walls, certainly white owned, and all of that. And I think that the idea was that we would tell them that you better get competitive and that there's no more tariff protection. And we had hoped that somehow or other they were going to become competitive industries. Well, actually what happened was many of them disappeared, didn't come back.
Yes.
So we went from Ha-Joon Chang again. I quote him a presentation he gave in South Africa a few years ago, where he said that in the 1960s, we were literally the most industrialized country outside of the developed core. And right now we end up being nothing compared to many other countries in the world. So I think that's the journey that we've been on. And I think that
can I just sort of make this concrete for our viewers? I mean, we've seen a massive decline in our textile sector, for instance. We've also seen a massive decline in mining, and of course in manufacturing, which I know you and I agree is a key driver of job creation and growth.
Yeah. So we've seen that in particular with the industrialization. What's the importance of industrialization? First of all, well, it is that you move from just digging out the minerals that you're bestowed with by nature out of the ground and selling them to somebody else who uses them to manufacture something. You actually move into that manufacturing yourself. And as we get into more knowledge-intensive industries, particularly, you find that the value of the raw material in the final product is a diminishing part of the final value of the product. So if you're not in that part of it, you're in the very worst part of the value chain. You're in the most unlucrative part of the value chain. It's where colonies and countries that were subject to the other countries ruling you, that's where they wanted you to be, because you were supplying them important raw materials. That's what colonialism was all about. And breaking out of that is the pathway out of poverty. That's what's happened in China. They've succeeded in doing it, not by following the neoliberal playbook, but precisely by not following it. They have managed to secure for themselves a situation in which they've lifted hundreds of millions of their people out of poverty. So I think that's the lesson of economic history. I think that what happened in South Africa was that we paid too much attention to the macroeconomic policy debate and too little to the real economy characteristics of our economy. And the deindustrialization was not noticed among everything else. I mean, and many people were, okay, if the financial sector grows and the manufacturing sector declines, we're moving into a post-industrial economy or something, when we've never been in industrial economy in the first place, only a slightly semi-industrialized country at best.
And the point is, you'll never create jobs the kind of jobs that South Africa needs to create that way.
Exactly. And even if many more jobs would be created in service sectors, manufacturing has linkages to those service sectors. So to put it another way, if you were to rely on tourism and the tourists all consumed imports, you'd be much worse off than if the tourists were consuming products that you were producing in your own economy. So I think that the linkages with service sectors and manufacturing is a very, very important one.
Right. Now, the interesting thing is that the world has come in a way back to square one. When Cyril Ramaphosa became president and he talked about a new dawn, I was very excited. I thought he was making a reference to the New Deal that was followed in the United States by Franklin Roosevelt, where he believed in bigger government. The government was come in and help when the economy gets into trouble. Now, and of course, that's now coming back, and President Biden in the United States is embracing it enthusiastically. And I think that's very close to where you are. And I just wanted to bring it back to the question. You're still a member of the Communist Party, but that's and I think you're passionate about your economic policy ideas, but you wouldn't call them communist. What you're talking about is not communist in the old understanding of communism, is it?
Well, it's not trying to recreate what we had in the Soviet Union. We've been through that. Joe Slobo wrote a pamphlet on the lessons that we learned from the collapse of the Soviet Union. But I do think that there are certain issues. I mean, first of all, I think what we've had in the world is we've had writ large that profit has been put before people. We see that in the vaccine issues, the vaccine apartheid. Right. I think what we've got right now is that the neoliberal playbook is looking a little thin. I mean, it's gone through two big crises right now, and we see that in practice, many of the governments of the developed world are abandoning large parts of it. I mean, this is what you've seen. Joe Biden is embracing much more of Keynesianism than he is of neoliberalism in the expenditure programs which they've been announcing in the US. So what we've got, I think, though, is the risk, as I've been calling it, of vaccine apartheid being followed by recovery apartheid, where the developed world is spending up to 25% of its GDP on recovery programs, active recovery programs, the development of infrastructure supported by government spending, all of that kind of stuff, and support for incomes, for small businesses, all of that kind of stuff. And that is going along with a message of austerity to the developing world. At least if there's some sort of okay, hold off on the austerity for a bit while you buy medical equipment
or vaccines,
or vaccines, but go back to it. And yes. I think that's the tension we have in South Africa, is that we start to define a recovery program. We start to talk about how This recovery program is going to give us an economy that's different from the one we were in 2019, which in the SACP we've been calling the crisis before the crisis, because it was already in crisis at that point. And we have that tension between all of that and some quite good programs which come out of the social dialogue in EDLAC and the recovery program, and then austerity, which holds it all back. And I think those are the, I don't mean by austerity that we should waste money or we should have tenders for every crook that wants a tender. But I think that what I mean by austerity is that we think that whatever the circumstances, we must prioritize the budget numbers and the achievement of the budget numbers, even in a context where our budget numbers and our debt to GDP ratio is not outrageously out of sync. But we want to prioritize getting those numbers down. What we risk is a vicious circle where we cut now, we hold back the economy, then the revenue is declining, then we have to cut again, rather than having faith in the recovery program to generate more revenue and that we eventually get back to a more reasonable set of budget numbers through growth and transformation and more inclusive growth. And
Rob,
I think that's
I'm sorry, I just want to cut in there, because obviously the response people will make is, why would we allow our government to have any more money, because it misuses it so much. And of course, you write in your book that Zuma's legacy, Jacob Zuma's legacy, in which you were a minister for 10 years, and the collective responsibility of all of us occupying leadership positions at that time, is one of public institutions deeply damaged by state capture and corruption. So I mean, you acknowledge you were part of that. And really, doesn't it weaken people making that argument to ask for government to be given a free hand?
Well, I don't think the government should be given a free hand in the sense that there's no accountability or that oversight shouldn't be improved, or that we shouldn't be required, if we're in government, I'm not in government now, to get better value for money and all those kind of things. I don't think that any of those things are wrong. I think these are things that we should be learning from state capture and corruption, that we had weak oversight and so on. And that, yes, our institutions have suffered great damage. But I don't think that the path forward is that dispense with public institutions and somehow hope that profit-seeking institutions or profit-seeking bodies and private capital is going to come to our rescue, when there's no evidence that it ever has been able to do that anywhere. So I think
it should be said that
we have a path of recovery there. We have a path of reconstruction and recovery of public institutions to make public institutions follow their public and developmental mandate. And I think that's the only way forward we've got.
Right. Now, you don't accept the view of many of the Zuma faction now that if you just end white monopoly capital, that'll be the magic bullet. You're not part of that. You're very aware that a lot of that is corrupt.
Well, I think that's what's happened, and I sketch out that my view of the politics of the ANC has become reduced to largely it's a battle between two aspirant capitalist factions. The one that wants to play by the rules, that has been the beneficiaries of empowerment in the past and wants to play by the rules, probably influenced by a degree of neoliberalism, and another one which is wants its turn to eat and is wanting to just follow a path of looting of existing resources. And I think that what we need to do in the movement context is to extend and enhance the influence of the working class and the poor, which I think has become much less over years. And I think that that's been to the detriment of the health of the national democratic revolution. So I think that's my take on those issues. So I think that we've got populism in place, which is pretending that it is really concerned with the interests of the masses and the poor, and that somehow or other, if you take from white monopoly capital, well, I mean, yes, monopoly capital and monopolization is an issue in South Africa, but I suggest that many of those spouting that kind of phrase were more interested in the color of the monopoly capital than they were in the monopoly character.
Right. Rob, I'm afraid we have to take a break. We have to take a break, but we'll be right back. And I'm going to ask you about the politics then. We'll be back in a moment. And we're back talking to Dr. Rob Davies, former Minister of Trade and Industries in the Zuma government. His new book is Towards a New Deal, the Political Economy of the Times of My Life. Rob, you talk about the impact of the politics. I mean, the consequence of the Zuma era was to preside over a time where COSATU split, so that what's left of the COSATU Trade Union Federation component of the ANC is now basically white-collar unions, not blue-collar unions. The Communist Party has been greatly weakened. I think you made the point that there are no communists left on the National Executive Committee of the ANC. So really, the Communist Party has been marginalized. COSATU is split. So isn't the ANC now really something that's more radical nationalist populism?
Well, I should say that since I wrote that, there was no communist elected in Polokwane in the 2017 conference at Nasrec. But Blade and Zamandi has subsequently been co-opted onto the NEC, so there is that now. But I think the point is that I think the influence of the working class diminished, and the split in COSATU I think was a major event that reflected that. And I don't think it's been to the good of a progressive way forward, and I think that has opened up the space for. Initially, I think for this form of state capture networks to masquerade as champions of the people. I think that's really what it's been there for. That's the effect of it. And so, people are calling for, radical economic transformation, even reducing it to its letters, the RET group and all of that, calling for things that I don't think they really mean. And it's really about allowing individuals, I think, to have their turn to have access to the benefits of tenders and procurement benefits and all of that. Now, I also do say in the book that I think that the era of state capture and corruption, which I don't think characterizes was the dominant feature of the entire 10 years of the Zuma presidency, but is particularly strongly in the second term, that had an effect even on things like industrial policy, where I point out that, there's a whole series of bent tenders, all of which were in defiance of the localization regulations that were enforced at the time, saying that certain part of the procurement had to be procured from locally manufactured sources. Well, I think all the big tenders had in common the fact that they prioritized imports over local production.
Because it was easier to deal with the bribes that way.
Well, I mean, they were not driven by any desire to procure in a way that was going to develop suppliers and build value chains and support industrialization. They were simply driven by how can a few individuals enrich themselves at the expense of everybody else, and I think that's what happened. So the effects of state capture and corruption were beyond the monetary theft or whatever was looted and taken out of the country. It was also in the damage to policies, instruments, and all of that. Now, I think that there would be a high level of agreement that what needs to happen is that those things need to come back into force. It's not that we just say, oh well, we lost our turn, let's just abandon them. Those things need to be reapplied. And I think that's the direction that government departments are.
But Rob, I want to ask you something about this. I mean, as someone coming from the left, the government incentivized the creation of a black middle class through black empowerment and all the policies you've been referring to. Why did it incentivize that instead? And wouldn't would you have to say? It should have instead have incentivized the creation of jobs for the poor. Surely, as a member of the Communist Party, let alone as a supporter of unions, it should have been a priority to create jobs for ordinary people rather than to create a little sliver of the rich.
Yes, I mean, I think that job creation and changing the lives of the poor should have been the priority. I do deal with the way I saw BEE. I think the trouble with BEE was that I don't think that some deracialization of the leadership positions of the economy and opening up spaces for people to become involved in business was wrong. I don't think that was wrong, but I think that what happened was that it took a particular form, and it took a form where people became agents and became intermediaries, and where procurement became the big issue. So getting access to a tender, then inflating the tender and getting somebody else to do the work, that was what passed as BEE. So during my time, we tried to address the question of fronting. And I think you'll see now the BEE commissioner, which it's an institution that was created during my time, is basically reporting that almost all the major BEE deals that are around have got an element of fronting in it, where somebody is engaged in this because they're looking to get a black face in some nominally important position, but which isn't followed through with the real powers in the company, so that they can get access to some government benefit or other. And that's the name of the game. We also supported the Black Industrialist Program, where we had another cohort of people. I mean, people who I think needed to be supported, where people took the opportunities that preparation provided to go out, learn the craft, and establish a genuine, productive enterprise. And I think there were a number of good cases of that. We tried to turn some of our support programs in that kind of direction. And I think that it was really. It's not a case of saying, well, let's not have any empowerment at all. Let's just focus on job creation. Let's leave the ownership and control of the economy as it is. I don't think that's a feasibility, but it is a question of trying to turn the efforts to deracialize the economy and promote more inclusivity and more representativity at ownership level in a direction that supports this in a real way, and not just in a nominal way, and also that supports those who want to engage in productive and job-creating activity.
But Rob, what you're referring to seems to suggest that there's a bigger problem. I mean, for instance, I've interviewed a lot of people who participated in NEDLAC, which is supposed to be the forum for government, business, and labor to come together. Nobody says it works well. The ANC, by your own admission in the book, is not really representing the working class anymore. Surely there are systemic problems. Do we need new institutions? How are we going to fix this? It's more than just some tinkering.
Well, I do think that NEDLAC, in its design, is an effective body for social dialogue, and I think that under President Ramaphosa, it's been given more teeth than it's had before, and I think this needs to be strengthened. I always took NEDLAC seriously. I always used to go as a minister to strategic sessions of the Trade and Industry Chamber. We used to consult on trade policy issues in NEDLAC, and it was part of the strengthening of our arm as we got into very complicated trade negotiations, for example. So I think that a body like NEDLAC has an important role to play and does need to be strengthened. And so I think it's not a question of saying, oh well, it hasn't worked well in the past, let's just ditch it. I think it's a battle to recover that. And I think the same I'd say about working class influence in the broad movement. I think that although the influence of the working class and the poor is diminished, it hasn't been totally absent. And that the real issue, I think, is that we need to strengthen that voice. We need to actually build more of a popular front of labor that has a much strengthened voice. So that in fact, I think that myself, when we assess all our economic policies and our recovery programs, we should be focusing laser-like, not on the the inflation rate, but we should be focusing laser-like on what's happening to unemployment, poverty, and inequality. And if they're not improving in a sufficient manner, then we should be willing to adapt and amend programs, enlarge programs that are designed to cope with this. And I think if we're not doing this, has led us to the situation we're in right this week, where we've seen, whatever the cause, there's an underlying tinderbox of increased poverty, inequality, and unemployment. And I think that's the issue that we now need to confront. And I mean, hopefully the reflection on what's happened in the last week or two will go in this direction eventually.
Rob, before we go to our last break, I do want to ask you something else. When I research these things, one gets a strong feeling that government and business talk past each other. And I've studied other countries like Japan, particularly, but also to a degree China, on how they fixed things, how they created the kind of rapid growth that we have to have. And when business and politics were neither so strong they could ignore the other, is when things really worked. And my sense is that we're still in a position where it's a dialogue of the deaf. That business and government are not talking to each other, or not listening to each other, perhaps is a better word. I'm sure there are discussions, there are meetings at NEDLAC, but when you look at one sector after another, you find that business is ready to put money into something, and for one reason or another, government has a policy that makes that untenable.
Well, I think that you need to have a dialogue of a particular kind. I think the best example I can give during my time was the dialogue that led to the automotive master plan, which then has become the trailblazer for the other master plans. And that one was, we had a very strong research input, which I think is very important. And it identified what were the issues and problems. And it talked about the ecosystem. We haven't got sufficient local component manufacturing. That's where the jobs were. We needed to focus on that. And out of that, we had a very, difficult, sometimes fraught dialogue, sometimes, but with unions involved, with the automotive industry involved. And we devised a set of programs that if you didn't increase your localization, you were going to get smaller benefits than you had in the past, and with targets that meant something. And I think that in the end of the day, what government has to do is government has to have the strategic overall direction. That's what's happened in all of the developing or the successfully industrializing economies. It wasn't that President Park called the Chai Bowl in and said, "What do you think?" and then said, "Oh, okay, I'll follow what you say." It wasn't like that at all. It was a very authoritarian government. I don't think it necessarily needs to be that, but the government gave the direction and said, for example, we're going to have a shipbuilding industry. And eventually cajoled the Chai Bowl into agreeing to that. And then that became the direction of the economic development of Korea. And then had a national effort and a coordinated governmental effort, which is one of the things I don't think we had during my time. We had too many dispersed agendas in government and too many dispersed agendas in the country, some of which were outright corrupt. And we never had the central high-level focus on industrial development of other successful industrializers.
We must take a break. Sorry, Rob, we must take our last break, but we'll be right back talking to Dr. Rob Davies. And we're back talking to Dr. Rob Davies, author of Towards a New Deal, A Political Economy of the Times of My Life. Rob, I mean, that seems to be the key thing, that business and government aren't on the same page, and there isn't a top-level support for it. I mean, for instance, the president talks about the information economy, for instance, and this is an area where I was involved. But we've had a plan for 21 years for digital migration, which is key to the information economy. We're now 6 years behind schedule for the International Telecommunications Union. For us to do it, we're behind Namibia, Mozambique, all these other countries. Why does it not happen in cabinet that someone says, This is outrageous. This has got to change. You can't have a country governed like this.
Yeah. Well, I think in that case, the issues were not between the industry and government, but government's inability to take a coherent decision and follow it through. And I think there were different. I think that someone still has to unpack all of this. I don't know how much the commission is, the Zondo Commission is going to unpack this, but I think some of the decisions that were taken were clearly shaped by, what were the interests of ANN7 getting onto digital platforms and stuff like that. And I think that those things shaped policies and reshaped policies in ways that were not to the benefit of, we can see, as you say, we're behind the curve even against our neighbors in the subcontinent. So I think that coherence is important. But as I say, I think that the way you do need a dialogue, but you also need strategic leadership from the state. And I think that the risk at this point in time will be that the narrative will start to say, well, public institutions don't work, government's been incoherent in the past, therefore let's leave it up to business to develop the strategy. And I think if we do that, many people in business have told me that if you think that the boardroom is sitting around with a big strategic development plan for the country and it's kind of got it at the back drawer, you're living in cloud cuckoo land. It's quite short-termist and it's quite driven by, the bottom line. That's different to what I think we need as a society.
But Rob, I want to take you up on that. I mean, from my research into Japan, there was a period after 1945 when government was too powerful and told business what to do, and things failed. And there was a period when business was too powerful and they told government what to do, and it failed as well. The only time things started to work was when they recognized the power of each other and were forced to cooperate. And I think until we get that, we're not going to have progress in South Africa.
Well, I think what I'm trying to say is that let's not let the fact that we didn't succeed in a previous incarnation lead to the reverse, lead to the idea that we're going to hope that we'll have a sort of a fairly vacuous social dialogue with business, and we'll slap each other.
I agree with you. It's got to be set forward. I think it was key in your book.
Let's define the role of both. And I think that in the end of the day, government is must chart the strategic direction in consultation, and then business will react and respond to the opportunities. Now, if you then create a whole series of obstacles that are many of them unnecessary, or bureaucratic inertia, or inefficiencies and stuff like that, then you're not going to get the follow through. So you need to address that side. You need to be efficient in your administration, not inefficient. You need to say no when you need to say no, not just not say yes. I think those are all things that government needs to do, and it hasn't done as well as it should do.
Right. No, I think that's right. I mean, I think the point you make, which I think is absolutely critical, is to not just look at the macro, look at the micro. In other words, it goes sector by sector. I mean, for instance, we know there is plenty of funds available to go into green energy, but there's been a massive battle to get government to support that.
Yeah. Well, and among other things, I think that we need to be developing a just transition as we move to a low carbon economy. And this is going to be no small venture. This is going to be an extremely complicated and difficult thing, because there's plenty of losers. I mean, I just came across something telling us that assets that are at risk from the Paris climate change agreement amounts to 1.8 trillion rand, which is about 41% of the GDP of the country. So it's quite a substantial transformation that we'll be going through, whether we like it or not.
I want to come back to some of the sort of real economy issues. One of the things I was very struck by in your book is you say that one of the things the government got right was infrastructure. There was a R1 trillion infrastructure program, and that sounds very good. And yet, most of our construction companies have gone bankrupt or on the verge of bankruptcy. How can there be all this infrastructure, and yet the infrastructure companies don't seem to be around anymore?
Well, I think what happened was that we gave greater coherence to the infrastructure program in the first term of the Zuma administration, and pushed it at a higher level. I think what we've uncovered since is that a number of the particular projects were not very effectively managed. This is the Kusile Medupi story and all sorts of other things.
Oh, of course, the whole ESCOM thing, yes.
There was corruption and all of that. But at a particular moment in time, I think that infrastructure gave it a boost to the economy at the time when the commodity super cycle had ended, and saved us from following Brazil into recession. So I think it showed what could happen. But then it started falling behind the curve. Investment started to fall back. The SIP projects were not performing as they should have done. And instead of being a driver of the economy, it became a laggard. And I think that's the story. We needed to be a leader again. And I'm afraid I'm not very enthusiastic about the current approach, which is called blended finance, where I've learned from engagements with UNCTAD and others, has been a tool which you turn infrastructure projects into financial instruments, then try to sell them to financial institutions. And in relation to the Sustainable Development Goals in least developed countries, it's delivered a very, very small part of the funding gap, and at high cost. And I think those sorts of things, and that's what we seem to hope is going to lead an infrastructure program in South Africa at the present time. I'm not convinced that will be the case.
Do you think it was a mistake to let Anglo-American and these other companies leave our shores? You talk about the fact that Anglo-American is a much smaller company now. It's the biggest company in South Africa and the biggest mining company in the world. It's drifted far down the list. And in fact, in this week's newspapers, it turns out that Anglo Gold is now making major investments into exploration in the United States. And yet exploration in South Africa, from what I've seen, has almost come to a halt. This is a major failure on our part, isn't it?
Yes, I think we were sold a pup there. People were persuaded that if we allowed them to list offshore, that they were going to raise capital more cheaply to invest in South Africa. Well, I don't think that ever was their objective. They tried to turn themselves into transnationals, and they weren't very successful. And it's quite interesting that the ones that did this from London, that's the old colonial capital, were the least successful. So yes. SA Mutual came back, Anglo-American declined, SA Breweries, after some initial successes, suddenly lost the company. And the one that was perhaps a bit more successful was Naspers, which turned to China. So I think that yes, I think that we were sold a pup, made a mistake, and I don't think we should have allowed that to happen. Then we could have had some South African champions instead of these erstwhile South African companies that turn themselves into unsuccessful transnational corporations. So yes, I do think that was something that was unsuccessful. And these attempts, well, you can mention that one, but I mean, there's the private sector's Medupi, if you like, and that is Sasol's investment in Lake Charles in the United States, which has been a huge over budget investment that doesn't look like it's going to do anything for the balance sheet of Sasol, and at the expense of for example, the promised project that they were going to have in Limpopo, which they're never going to do now. So I think all of this is a lesson, and not a good one.
Yeah, so I mean that's very interesting, because it seems, yes, that seems to have definitely weakened our economy and limited the amount of capital and investment and managerial energy that could have gone into South Africa.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you agree that I mean, mining has been in a very steep decline?
Well, it has, and I mean, we've got finite resources, and mining is a time-bound industry. Well, maybe that it's got another 100 years or so to go, but it's not here indefinitely.
Right.
And I think we need to add more value to our product. So I was enthusiastic about the possibility of fuel cell technology using platinum as a catalytic converter. There were pilot projects for buses that were in the Northwest Province. I don't know what's become of that pilot project, but I do think that there are abilities. If we have electric cars, we could have fuel cell public transport vehicles, buses, and other larger, perhaps lorries, things like that. And we should focus in on what are the downstream industries that are going to be using our products, our mining products, and try to get more local beneficiation from our mineral resources while we still have them.
Right. No, that's a good place to end, because that is an optimistic note, and there is great potential. Like, we move to green energy, as you say, it's complicated. The just transition is not an easy project, but it's an essential one, and it does seem to have some real potential for us if we manage it properly. Well, we've run out of time. Thanks, Rob. Thanks for talking to us.
It's a great pleasure.
And thanks for watching. I'm John Madison. Thanks for watching the program.